You throw yourself into strangers' arms, but wake up lonelier than when you fell asleep. Maybe what you call desire is just your pain, begging not to be forgotten for one more night. Today, you'll understand why Carl Jung said, what you refuse to confront disguises itself and takes control. You tell yourself it's just lust, a natural urge, a simple craving. But if it were that simple, you wouldn't feel this kind of hollow once the night ends. You wouldn't stare at the ceiling wondering why, after all that closeness, you still feel untouched. You wouldn't ache in places no one's ever laid a hand on. There's something beneath your desire that you keep trying not to see. Not because you're weak, but because the truth costs more than most people are willing to pay. You move from face to face, from bed to bed, not chasing connection, but distraction. What you fear most isn't loneliness. It's the silence that follows when there's no one left to mirror back a version of yourself that feels wanted. Because when there's no touch, no gaze, no rush of being chosen, what's left? The ache. The one that's always been there. The one you try to rename as freedom, passion, or chemistry. But deep down you know, it's not desire that drives you. It's something older, something darker. Carl Jung said that what you refuse to confront will control you, and that's exactly what's happening. The part of you that was neglected, dismissed, or used is still alive, and it learned how to survive through seduction. Not because you're manipulative, but because that's what you were taught, that affection has to be earned, that attention is the closest thing you'll get to love, and that being wanted is the only proof that you matter. And so you learn to be magnetic, but not whole. The tragedy is that you look like you're in control. You appear confident, even powerful, but beneath every choice you make is a fear of rejection, of being forgotten, of being invisible again. That's not lust. That's a trauma that learned how to dress itself. You think you're chasing pleasure, but you're running. From memories that never healed, from truths that were never spoken, from the parts of yourself that you had to bury just to survive. And now, every encounter feels like a negotiation with your own emptiness. You keep hoping that this time it'll be different, that someone will see past the performance, past the heat, past the script. But most don't. And when it's over, they leave. And when they leave, they take the illusion with them. And what's left is silence again. A silence that keeps reminding you that your hunger was never about sex. It was about being seen. You never wanted dozens of bodies. You wanted one soul to stay. But somewhere along the way, you stopped believing that was possible. So you settled for moments, for attention, for anything that made you feel wanted, even briefly. But now you're tired. Tired of pretending this is enough. Tired of confusing reaction with connection. Tired of calling your wound by a name it never chose. That's what this conversation is for. Not to judge you, but to name what's been unnamed for too long. Because no, what you're feeling isn't just lust. It's a wound with memory, a pattern with a face. It's trauma, dressed up as desire, begging to be unmasked, not for others, but finally for you. The craving didn't start in your body. It started the first time you were emotionally abandoned and no one came back. The first time you felt unworthy of affection unless you performed for it. That's where your idea of desire was born. Not in curiosity or instinct, but in survival. What you chase now with urgency is not pleasure. It's the illusion of being chosen. And you've mistaken that illusion for lust. No one tells you that, Bo. Everyone keeps saying you're empowered, that it's your body, your choice, your freedom. But deep down, you know better. Because it doesn't feel like freedom when you can't stop. When your hands shake not from excitement, but from the fear of being alone again. When the need to be wanted is louder than your own clarity. That's not liberation. That's a scar, screaming through your impulses. The truth is, your desire has memory. It remembers the silence, the times you felt invisible, the times you tried to speak your needs and were dismissed, mocked, or left. And so now you don't speak, you seduce. You don't ask to be understood, you offer your body instead. Because somewhere inside, you still believe that's the only part of you anyone could ever want. And that's where the cycle begins. You don't crave sex. You crave evidence, proof that you still matter, that you still have power over someone, that you still have the ability to be wanted, even if just for a moment. But every time you use your body to buy that feeling, it costs you something, something internal, something sacred. You can't keep calling this desire, because desire is expansive. It creates, it builds. What you're doing is chasing oblivion, the kind of relief that erases, that numbs, that shuts your awareness down for a few minutes, and then leaves you colder than before. And this is the part that hurts most. Sometimes you choose the ones who will leave, because deep down, that kind of ending feels familiar, safe, predictable. This isn't just about attraction, it's about identity. You built yours around being desirable, because being real was never safe, and now you're trapped in the performance. You become whoever they need you to be, and when they're gone, you're left with someone you don't recognize. If this is hitting deeper than you expected, if this feels less like a theory and more like a mirror, stay. If this made you uncomfortable, good. That discomfort is your real self waking up. And if something in you knows this isn't just about sex, but about the lies you were taught to survive, then subscribe. Because until the end of this video, you'll realize that what excites you might be the very thing that destroyed you. And you'll never see your desire the same way again. Carl Jung never defined libido as just sex. For him, libido was vital energy, the current that moves everything inside you, your drive to create, to seek, to transform. When that energy flows freely, you live with presence. But when it's wounded, it twists, it contracts. It hides in the only places where it can still breathe. And sometimes, the only place it finds air is in the illusion of desire. You think you're turned on, but what you are is tired, not of bodies, of carrying your soul in survival mode, disguised as freedom. Because if your libido is consumed by sex, urgency, repetition, and addiction, that's not power. That's escape. It's your psyche screaming for integration, and you offering it pleasure in place of truth. Jung knew, what isn't integrated by consciousness seeks expression through impulse. And if you won't listen to your pain, it will become your habit. Most of your energy isn't going into becoming. It's being drained trying to prove you're still desirable, that you still exist, that you still matter. But healthy libido doesn't seek validation. It seeks authentic expression. What you're feeling isn't desire. It's undigested abandonment, still trying to find a voice. And that voice becomes a loop. Your trauma hijacks your energy. That energy tries to escape through any crack it can. Sex, conquest, distraction. But it's never about the other person. It never was. Their body is just the stage where your emptiness repeats itself. And the more it repeats, the less your libido serves your evolution. And the more it serves your old pain. It's like your soul has been split in two. One part wants connection, depth, real love. The other just wants the pain to stop. And you feed the part that screams louder. The one that never asks for stillness. It asks for thrill. It asks for chaos. It asks for someone who can make you forget, just for a moment, that you've lost control of your own energy. But here's the danger. The more you hand over your libido to empty cycles, the further you drift from your truth. Because libido isn't just instinct. It's direction. It shapes where you go, who you become. And when it's trapped in compulsion, you're no longer living. You're being lived. Your story isn't being written. It's being repeated. That's the real prison. Not being trapped by someone else, but by your own pattern. And not realizing the key has always been in your hand. Jung never condemned desire. He condemned unconsciousness. The problem was never the sex. It was the lie you tell when you use sex to run from yourself. The story you inherited and never questioned. That love must be earned through sacrifice. That affection must be chaste. That your worth only exists if someone else sees it. But libido, when reclaimed, changes everything. It begins to rise. It leaves the body. It touches the soul. And then you stop begging for attention because you begin to produce meaning. You start to create, to say no, to choose, to let go of what once felt essential but was only repetition wearing a mask. You walk into the room like you own it. You look like you're in control, seductive, confident, untouchable. But none of that is power, it's armor. Carefully rehearsed armor that hides how deeply you've been conditioned to perform instead of exist. Because true control doesn't need to prove itself. And if you still need to be desired to feel alive, you're not leading, you're reacting. That's the trap no one talks about. The one that makes you believe the more people want you, the more power you have. But power without peace is just fear with better lighting. You learned early on that being wanted is safer than being real. That admiration feels like safety. That arousal feels like acceptance. But these are just simulations. No one's seeing you. They're seeing the image you've built, the one that guarantees you won't be left again. But inside that image is a bargain. I'll be what you desire, so I don't have to be what I fear. You think you're the one seducing, but the truth is, you're the one being hunted. Not by others, but by your own unacknowledged wounds. Jung would say, your persona, the mask you wear to adapt to the world, has taken over. And when that happens, you stop living from your truth. You start living from your strategy. It's a strategy of survival. Control the room before the room can reject you. Offer your body before someone can question your worth. Keep the upper hand so you never have to feel how powerless you actually feel when you're alone. But power that's rooted in fear is not power. It's dependence, and dependence always hides beneath the performance. You think you're choosing. You think you're free. But you're not. Because every move, every glance, every seduction is calculated to avoid the one thing you never healed from, being invisible. That's not freedom. That's a reflex. A beautifully tragic reflex. And it's costing you. It's costing you intimacy. It's costing you clarity. It's costing you the one thing you claim to be seeking, connection. Because when you're constantly performing for attention, you lose the ability to be seen without the act. And when the act becomes your identity, you forget who you were before you needed the performance. The most dangerous part? You don't even realize it's a performance anymore. It's automatic. Your smile, your tone, the way you flirt, the way you disappear before someone gets too close. You've built an entire emotional architecture around not being hurt, and now you're trapped inside it, mistaking the cage for confidence. But here's the rupture. Real control doesn't feel like domination. It feels like calm. It feels like knowing you can walk away, not because you're detached, but because you're whole. It's not about being untouchable. It's about being untamed by the wounds that used to rule you. That kind of control doesn't seduce. It selects. It doesn't beg to be seen. It knows it already is. And if that makes you uncomfortable, good. That means you're waking up. Because the seduction you thought was your strength might just be the prison you dressed in perfume. And the control you're clinging to? It might be the very thing keeping you from ever being truly free. You don't have to act on every craving. That's the truth no one tells you. Because the world celebrates urgency. It rewards impulsiveness. It teaches you to obey your feelings like they're sacred commands, as if every desire is divine. But not every craving comes from your soul. Some come from your wounds. And when you follow every impulse without question, you're not free, you're possessed. Real transformation doesn't begin when you stop wanting. It begins when you stop reacting. There's a moment, brief and brutal, between the rise of your desire and the act that follows. That space is your freedom. That pause is your battlefield. And most people skip right over it because silence feels like death when you've lived your whole life being driven by noise. But if you could stay in that pause for just a little longer, something shifts. The urge starts to reveal its real face. You begin to see that what you thought was lust is actually loneliness wearing a costume. That what you felt as need is just your nervous system echoing a pattern it's memorized too well. And in that awareness, in that single breath of restraint, something ancient in you begins to crack. Because you're not meant to be ruled by reflex. You're not meant to serve your own pain dressed up as pleasure. Jung taught that what you can observe, you can integrate. But what you identify with, what you act on blindly, will rule you from the shadows. So stop. Watch. Don't fight your desire. Don't suppress it, but don't surrender to it either. Just witness it. as if it's not yours, but a visitor, a messenger, a mirror. This isn't about denial. This is about discernment, about learning the difference between a soul calling and a trauma whispering through your hormones. It's about sitting with your urge long enough to realize it's not a truth, it's a trigger. And triggers aren't roads forward. They're signs pointing backward to the places you've refused to grieve. And yes, it's uncomfortable. It will feel like dying, because your identity has been built on response, on action, on filling the silence before it starts to echo. But the silence is where your strength lives. That stillness you keep avoiding, that's where your power begins. Not in performance, not in seduction, but in sovereignty. When you can look at your desire, feel it fully, name it clearly, and still choose not to act, that's when you begin to lead your life instead of being led by it. That's when your libido stops being a reaction and starts becoming direction. Not down into repetition, but up into creation. Because that moment of pause is sacred. It's not suppression, it's rebirth. It's where your impulse becomes insight, where your trauma starts to lose its grip, where you stop being a puppet and become a presence. And that kind of presence, it terrifies the world. Because nothing is more dangerous than someone who no longer obeys a cycle. So next time the craving hits, don't run, don't reach, don't react. Just stay, feel it without feeding it. Watch the wave rise, and then let it crash without moving an inch. That stillness will show you something lust never could, that you are not your hunger. You are the one who decides what gets fed and what finally ends. Imagine a bird that was born inside a cage, but no one ever told it there was a door. So it sings louder, flutters harder, decorates the bars, hoping someone will love it for how beautifully it survives confinement. That's what most of us do. We romanticize our pain. We polish our performance. We make our dysfunction look like strength. But deep down, we're still trapped. Not by others, by the identity we built to be wanted. This is the part that stings. You became the cage. You stopped trying to fly because you started believing the cage was safe, predictable, familiar. And now every time you feel desire, it's not the call of freedom. It's the echo of your own containment. Your hunger isn't for ecstasy, it's for escape. But you've forgotten what that even means. Because it's been so long since you actually let yourself want something that wasn't just another version of your wound. Desire should be wild. It should be sacred. It should expand you. But when it's shaped by trauma, it becomes a loop, a repetition, a ritual of forgetting. And the most painful part? You know it. You feel it. Every time you reach for someone who doesn't see you. Every time you undress like it's a currency. Every time you leave feeling smaller than you were before. You know. But the cage is comfortable. It's decorated with compliments, with attention, with moments that feel almost real. Almost. You don't want real, not fully, because real means being seen without the mask. Real means being vulnerable without the performance. Real means risking rejection for the first time as yourself. And that's terrifying. Because the last time you were yourself, truly, someone made you feel like that wasn't enough. So you built this cage. You called it confidence. You called it liberation. But it's neither. It's just loneliness rehearsed so many times, it started to look like a personality. The bird inside you still remembers. It remembers open sky. It remembers what it was like to sing without fear of not being heard. It remembers softness before it was punished. But now, all it knows is rhythm, routine, reaction. So you keep opening the cage door for others, hoping one of them will unlock you. But no one can do that. No one can free a bird that refuses to see the bars we're self-built. And maybe that's the most tragic part of it all. You learn to love the cage because it gave you a role, because it gave you attention, because it made you feel useful, but it never made you feel whole. You keep asking why nothing changes, why every new connection ends the same, why no one stays. But the truth is, you've never stayed either. You've never stayed still long enough to meet yourself without the craving, without the panic, without the echo of all the people who once made you feel disposable. You are not that echo. You are not the hunger. You are not the cage. But you are the one who built it, and you're the only one who can unbuild it. And when you finally stop polishing the bars, when you finally stop performing your pain, you'll remember you weren't born to be caged. You were born to remember your wings. Not so someone could love them, but so you could fly without needing to be seen. You walk like you're in control. You dress like you're free. But freedom built on performance isn't freedom. It's surveillance. And the eyes that control you now, they're not in the room anymore. They're in your mind, in your mirror, in the way you still choose what makes you feel enough. Michel Foucault warned us, power isn't always loud. Sometimes it watches you silently until you begin to police yourself. And that's exactly what's happening. You don't need anyone to shame you because you've internalized every expectation. You learned early who you had to be to get approval, what kind of body you needed, what kind of look, what kind of tone, what kind of desire was acceptable. And now, even when no one's watching, you perform like they are. That's the quiet violence of a culture obsessed with validation. You think you're expressing yourself, but often you're just obeying the image you believe will be rewarded. You don't want sex. You want to be seen, but not truly. Only in the way you've been conditioned to be seen. Desirable, curated, untouchable. Not messy, not raw, not real. So the bedroom becomes a stage. The body becomes a costume. The desire becomes a script. You don't explore. You replicate. You recreate what you think passion is supposed to look like. But in that performance, you lose the one thing you actually crave: intimacy. Because no one can love you when you're busy playing a version of yourself that doesn't even breathe anymore. And this performance isn't conscious. That's what makes it so dangerous. It's automatic, invisible. You go through the motions, smile in the mirror, pick the right angle, say the right line, not because you want to, but because you don't know how not to. You've forgotten what it's like to move without being watched. Even in silence, you're still trying to impress the ghosts of every person who once made you feel like your real self wasn't enough. But what happens when you stop performing? What happens when you stop reacting to the gaze and start asking who you're really performing for? Whose approval are you still chasing years later? Who did you once long to impress and never could? And what part of you still believes that if you get it right this time, you'll finally be loved? This is the deeper layer of the trap. You're not ruled by lust. You're ruled by longing. Not for bodies, but for recognition. For someone to look at you and say, you don't need to earn it anymore. But that voice never comes from outside. It never did. It has to come from the part of you that's tired of being edited just to be tolerated. Because the eyes that shaped you, they're still shaping your choices. The partner you pick, the way you touch, the way you retreat. But until you name that gaze, it owns you. And until you challenge the belief that you only matter on your desirable, you'll keep living like a statue someone forgot to sculpt fully. You're not a performance. You're not a brand. You're not a product of what they wanted. You're something raw, wild, true. But to reclaim that, you have to step out of the spotlight. You have to let go of the mask that always knew how to please and finally learn how to breathe without being watched. Carl Jung said that the parts of ourselves we refuse to face don't disappear, they become fate. The desire you kept blaming, it was never the problem. It was just the voice of a younger self asking to be seen in a language no one ever taught you to understand. What ruined you wasn't lust, it was the silence around your pain. The way you learned to call hunger love. The way you performed for approval because the truth felt too risky to survive. But that performance has a cost. Every time you choose being wanted over being whole, you abandon yourself a little more. You dim, you vanish. And that's where the despair begins, not in the act, but in the forgetting. Søren Kierkegaard said the worst form of despair is not being unable to become yourself, but becoming someone else and pretending it's fine. You've spent years shaping yourself into someone palatable, desired, safe. But safe doesn't mean alive. And what you called confidence was often just a costume. A response, a shield. You didn't want more lovers. You wanted to feel like your existence didn't depend on someone else's desire. And now you're here, at the edge, not of ruin, but of realization, of finally questioning whether the pleasure was ever yours, or just a byproduct of pain you couldn't name. That's where healing begins. Not in control, not in repression, but in confrontation. Not of the world, but of the self you keep abandoning. Because your desire is sacred, but only when it serves your truth, not your wounds. Only when it rises from wholeness, not hunger. Only when you no longer need to seduce the world just to feel real. This isn't about guilt. It's about remembering, reclaiming, reintegration. Jung's path wasn't toward purity. It was toward wholeness. To stop splitting yourself into acceptable fragments and finally step into the entire storm of who you are, even if no one applauds, especially then. So let this be the moment. The one where you stop polishing your cage. The one where silence isn't used to hide, but to listen. Because the world doesn't need another perfect persona. It needs your presence, your untamed honesty, your decision to no longer obey the script. And if this opens something in you, if it cracked even one layer of the mask, I ask one thing. Help me keep this space alive. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, share this with someone still confusing their pain for passion. Not out of charity, but because we need more places that speak truth without shame. And if you feel ready, there's more. Watch the next video. Let this one be your first step, not your last. Because this isn't just about lust. It's about freedom. Not the kind that feels like escape, the kind that feels like return. And now I leave you with a question, not for your mind, but for the version of you who's been waiting. How long will you keep seducing the world just to avoid facing yourself?